Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a major update regarding the tariff situation April 2nd, which is when all of the major tariffs are going to go into place, the reciprocal tariffs. And we already have Trump's plan seemingly working with Vietnam slashing tariffs on U.S. gas and cars as Trump's Trade Liberation Day looms. So Trump is looking on April 2nd to put in all the reciprocal tariffs. He came out earlier this week and hinted that maybe some of the tariffs that were originally going to go into place are not going to go into place. This is kind of why I've stopped predicting what Trump is going to do on the tariffs. There are certain things, if you do want to generate revenue through tariffs, you're going to have to commit to long-term tariffs, which we think Trump did yesterday with the auto industry and the 25% tariff, where Trump said, yeah, this is going to be on throughout the entirety of my administration. We don't know if there's going to be exemptions or that's going to change because Trump, he's always doing doublespeak when it comes to the tariffs. It's negotiations. It's a strategy to keep these countries on their toes and also to try and understand the market and how it's being affected. But, you know, there was always going to be a turbulent time early on in Trump's presidency. This is just the reality of it. When you're talking about economics, when you do something, there's always going to be a positive and a negative reaction. Right now, when it comes to tariffs, there's been a lot of negative in terms of not so positive stock market movement, which is what we expect when tariffs go into place. When Trump says I may or may not do it, it is that unknown that scares the markets. But this is the short term, and we'll see what happens. But I do think Trump needs to come out with an official game plan, and he knows this. He understands for the markets it's important, the health of them throughout the entirety of his presidency. At some point, whether it's after April 2nd or within the next few months, there needs to be a game plan on tariffs, the tariffs that the United States will be keeping in place. And you're going to need tariffs. You have to use tariffs as a way to generate revenue for the United States, and it will bring jobs back to the United States. And inevitably, and I've said this, the tariffs, especially on the auto industry, will increase the prices, at least in the short term. That's just the reality of how these things work. Now, we think with a capitalist society and the competition, depending on what type of vehicle it is, eventually the prices could come back down even with domestic production. But you are also getting the domestic production, which is what we want. It stimulates the economy instead of those jobs going overseas and the cars being produced in other countries. That's another point of it. But when it comes to Vietnam and possibly some of these other countries, you can see Trump's administration dirty 15 list of trading partners. Vietnam, apparently, they are one of them, and they're rushing to reduce their trade surplus with the United States. And they're already preparing for this. And I think this is why Trump came out and said that, well, it might not be as bad as we originally expected in terms of the amount of reciprocal tariffs going into place on April 2nd, because some of these countries, they're so small with their economies, they just don't want to deal with it with the United States facing reciprocal tariffs. They can't handle it. And so I think Mexico and Canada are a little bit different situations, although even Mexico, they've been more cooperative than Canada. Canada is really the one to watch when it comes to these tariffs, just because they've come out against the United States and they're trying to combat them with negative press against Trump and the idea that tariffs hurt both countries. And we do know that tariffs initially do tend to hurt both countries, but long term, they're going to hurt one country way more than the other. And based on Canada and their GDP reliance of the United States, they're going to be hurt significantly more than we are in terms of them putting reciprocal tariffs on our stuff if we tariff them. So when it comes to the April 2nd, this is what Trump was looking for. Worst case, if we're tariffed, if American products are tariffed, we're going to tariff you guys. And then what's the point of even having tariffs in the first place? I think that's part of the strategy when it comes to Trump. Now, Trump has also talked about tariffs and how he wants them to be a major part of the revenue for the United States. And he's hinted at possibly getting rid of the income tax. It's just very hard with the deficit that we currently have of $2 trillion. It's extremely challenging. The money has to be made somewhere. If it's not through income tax, where is it through? I know they're talking about, and they have eliminated things. And I think Elon and Doge and through this government waste, they can save, it's hard to say, 200, 300 billion, maybe. I mean, to put into context, USAID or USAID, they slashed base, I think 97% of that program, and it only saved $20 billion. Now, you think that's a lot of money, but when you've got a $2 trillion deficit, we know that the entitlements are going to have to be attacked. And I don't know if Trump really wants to do that, because technically he doesn't have to do it, and it would probably make his approval rating go down. But it's like, somebody has to do it. We're grown adults here. The entitlements are a huge part in terms of the amount of debt that the United States has, and so the Social Security needs to be restructured, Medicare and Medicaid, the fraud needs to be eliminated. But when you go looking for the fraud, that's when people get very angry because it's like you're cutting those things. Well, no, I mean, it's estimated there's 200, $300 billion of fraud potentially in some of those, the entitlements. So this is all going to have to be looked at. But the point is, when it comes to tariffs, it is generating revenue for the U.S. Economy. And if you slash taxes like Trump likes to do when he put in his 2017 Job and Tax Act, and he's keeping that, and apparently he's expanding on it and making it even cheaper for people, you're going to have to find that money elsewhere, especially when we're already facing a $2 trillion deficit. So, and Trump knows that, and that's why they have the Department of Government Efficiency. They're trying to do something and be proactive about this. It just takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. And if it did happen overnight, then the economy would immediately tank because of a rapid shift. This all has to be, it's very delicate, these situations, trying to, maneuver the levers of the U.S. economy. And if you do something, it's going to have a positive and a negative reaction. That's just the reality. You put these tariffs on, you're going to get more domestic production. You're going to stimulate the economy. You're going to get more high quality jobs for U.S. citizens. But the prices of these vehicles, if he does the tariff on the auto industry, they're going to go up immediately. They are 100%. That's just the reality of tariffs and domestically producing things. There's a reason they're produced in other countries, because they're cheaper. So you can either keep that going, and that's what Trump would deem as an unhealthy relationship, or you can say, well, let's tariff these certain industries and kickstart domestic production and force these companies to produce their vehicles in the United States rather than outsourcing them for a cheaper amount of money. That's really the reality of that. Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all cars not made in the United States. Good. This will hugely support American manufacturing jobs. And again, the prices of vehicles are going to go up. It's just the reality. Now, we would hope with a competitive capitalist society, depending on the vehicle, that eventually they will go back down, because you will adapt to it. And with the competition, they'll be able to bring them back to a reasonable price. But it is what it is. Nothing is perfect when it comes to maneuvering the economy here. There's always going to be positives, negatives. This is a long-term thing. And this is why it's actually noble by Trump, and it's the exact opposite of what Biden did. And I guess it is kind of a false equivalency, because you are dealing with COVID and coming out of that. But what they did is they just printed a bunch of money. They artificially inflated the economy, and they made the economy look really, really good. And that obviously caused, in 2022, at a certain point, midsummer, the 9% inflation rate. And so what Trump is doing is really the opposite. He is hurting the economy and the stock market right now for a long-term benefit of domestic production. And so, by the way, another thing with tariffs that's interesting, they say long-term tariffs hurt inflation, but short-term, they can potentially help inflation because of the uncertainty within the stock market with stocks going down. That's why the inflation number was lower than projected in February. And we'll see what it ends up being in March. But either way, it is something to note. At least short term, it can help inflation because of the stock reaction to tariffs being announced. Now, is April 2nd the last day? Are we out of the woods when it comes to the tariffs? Trump knows that eventually, this is just like the first stage of his second term here. So we're still in, pretty early in the first quarter. What we're saying is, at a certain point, Trump will make fully clear which tariffs are staying in place, which tariffs are being removed. The Canada situation is going to work itself out either way, depending on what happens with their election. And that's a whole nother thing, to where if Trump wants to go really hard to try and acquire Canada, or at least Western Canada, the tariffs are going to have to very likely stay in place, because you're going to have to squeeze those people and then say, hey, listen, we can remove all the tariffs just like that if you join us. And so you have to incentivize it, but you have to keep them on to be able to have that in your back pocket to incentivize in the first place. And so that's something to where with Canada, we're waiting to see what happens with that election. And if Carney wins, it's, you've got projections right now. The Liberal Party could be getting more seats than the Conservative Party. We know in Alberta and Saskatchewan are not going to be happy about that. But that's just another thing to watch in terms of that. But at some point, Trump's going to have to make what he says on the tariffs. We're keeping this in place. He did say, to be fair, the 25% tariffs on the cars. There was a media person, thankfully, they asked a good question. They said, like, how long is this staying in place? Are you committing to this? And he said, it's going to be in the full 4 years, which there's going to have to be certain tariffs, and the ones against China are, but just in general, you're going to have to commit to tariffs because just the market uncertainty is not good long term. And Trump knows that. Short term, you can do this and you can deal with the rough waters of the market, but long term, you don't want that, especially for Trump and his administration. If he wants to see significant growth within the stock market, you have to make your point in what you want and articulate the tariffs and what's staying in place and what's not in terms of the long term. I think April 2nd is more about getting other countries to remove their tariffs, just like we saw with Vietnam against U.S. products. That's what I think April 2nd mainly is. And if some countries don't, just like we saw with Canada, there is going to be more uneasiness for a certain period of time, depending on what Trump wants to do with the tariffs. He's just trying to see what these other countries are going to do in terms of their reactions. It depends on that. And then Trump will make an announcement on whether or not those reciprocal tariffs will be continuing based off of the market, based off of everything he's getting in terms of the intel on if tariffs are working and the job production that will happen in the United States if the tariffs continue. I think Trump knows we need trade with other countries. We do. But he is trying to generate revenue through these tariffs because we have a horrible, horrible deficit. That's why he's talked about cutting the military by 8%. It's unheard of. And that's something that we'll see if that ends up happening. I find it hard to believe because you think that's, oh, it's great, we need to cut the military spending. And we probably, I mean, we do. We honestly do, based off of how much we spend on it compared to other countries. But that is something that's going to hurt the economy a little bit because you're talking about spending less money. There's always a positive and a negative. So how do you offset that? Maybe it's through money generation of these tariffs. I mean, it's hard to really say, but the point of it is, it seems like these April 2nd reciprocals are mainly to get these other countries to remove, and Vietnam is already doing it even before it happens, before the day happens. And so Vietnam, I'm guessing, will get hit a lot less harder with reciprocals because they've slashed theirs on U.S. products. And so I think that's the overall point when it comes to the tariff situation, at least on April 2nd. I think Canada and Mexico are a little bit different because of how important they are as trading partners in terms of our tariffs against those countries. And Canada, just in terms of Trump trying to acquire the country, whether or not he's serious about it. He has talked about it a lot of times, but I would imagine at some point Trump is going to come out with an official statement on where the tariffs are going to be, where they're remaining. He's saying right now, and it's hard to really trust him, and that's why I've stopped really projecting and saying, well, this tariff is going to remain this one. He says it's going to remain the auto tariff, the 25% tariff on all cars not made in the United States is going to remain throughout his entire presidency. Is that true? Will there be exemptions? You can't predict it. But if that is true, then yes, you are going to have to stick to certain tariffs if you want to make revenue off of those tariffs. And you're also going to eventually improve the United States domestic production of vehicles, even though there will be a short-term price increase. There will be. This is just the reality of it. There's pros and cons when you do things like this. There's going to be some cons. And with Trump, it's more noble because he is taking it on the chin with the economic situation right now. It's not the best, but this is the time to do it. He's restructuring everything right now. It's the first quarter of his presidency. This is just how it goes. And so once we get into 2026, 2027, the hope is that it's looking like maybe in June they will lower the interest rates. Hopefully we continue to get lower inflation numbers. I don't think they're going to go up. And if we do get the lower, I think Trump wants the lower interest rates, hopefully by midsummer, and then that will kickstart the economy. And that's and the tough days are already over because you already have all the tariffs in place, hopefully by then. And we'll have to see what ends up happening. But this idea right now in terms of the April 2nd reciprocals is to get other countries to remove their tariffs, because like, well, if we're tariffing you now and you guys are already tariffing us, what's the purpose of the tariffs even going into place? So it just depends how many countries will act like Vietnam, and if a lot of countries do, then the April 2nd is not going to be a crazy day outside of a huge win for Trump to get all of the tariffs against U.S. products removed. That would be a major win. And you look at what's happening with Canada and them potentially saying they want to renegotiate the trade deal with the United States. Now you're talking about the 250% tariff on dairy being removed, along with other things, and a better trade deal with Canada. So there's these choppy waters right now, but this is a long-term thing. You agree to a new trade deal. It's probably going to be a 6 or 7 year agreement. So that you're talking about 2 or 3 months of economic turmoil, and it's not even bad turmoil. It's just a little bit choppiness for 7 years of an amazing trade deal that you worked out because of 2 months of tariffs, you'll make that trade 100 times out of 100. But when we're analyzing these situations and we're in the moment, it seems like it's so bad. Why is Trump doing these tariffs? It's too much. Well, no, it's a long-term solution. And that's even what the tariffs are in the auto industry. People saying it's going to be a big problem. And we don't even know if Trump is going to keep the 25% on his entire administration. This is just how he negotiates and how he does tariffs. It's very wishy-washy, and it's done on purpose that way. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.